Close your eyes and imagine a jungle so dense that sunlight becomes a rumor, filtering through the canopy in thin shafts that illuminate nothing but make the shadows deeper, more absolute. Lubang Island in the Philippines, 1945, is not paradise despite the tropical beauty. It is a battlefield gone quiet, a place where the war has moved on, but the jungle remembers, holds on to the violence like the soil holds on to blood. The sounds here are layered, birds you cannot see, insects that drone in frequencies that vibrate in your skull, the distant crash of waves against cliffs, and beneath it all, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you understand that you are alone in a way that transcends mere physical isolation. Your name is Hiro Onoda. You are 23 years old, a second lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army, trained in intelligence and guerrilla warfare at the Nakano School, where they taught you not just how to fight, but how to survive, how to disappear into terrain and become invisible, how to wait. Waiting, your instructors told you, is a weapon. Patience is strategy, and above all else, never surrender. The concept of surrender was not just discouraged, it was presented as a moral impossibility, a betrayal so profound that death was preferable, that continuing the mission alone was more honorable than returning home in defeat. Your orders were clear when you arrived on Lubang in December 1944. Conduct guerrilla warfare, disrupt enemy operations, do not allow yourself to be captured, and most importantly, do not die until you receive orders to do otherwise. Your commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, looked you in the eyes when he gave you these instructions and said something you will remember for the next 3 decades. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens will come back for you. You believed him. You had no reason not to believe him. The idea that he might be wrong, that the war might end in ways that make retrieval impossible, that you might be forgotten, these possibilities did not exist in the framework you were given. August 1945. You hear explosions in the distance, see American aircraft flying overhead with increasing frequency. Notice that the Japanese defensive positions on the island have gone quiet in a way that suggests abandonment rather than tactical repositioning. But you do not know what these signs mean. You have no radio communication with command. You have no way to verify information. And when leaflets begin appearing in the jungle, leaflets dropped from American aircraft announcing that Japan has surrendered, that the emperor has spoken, that the war is over, you dismiss them as enemy propaganda. Of course the Americans would try psychological warfare. Of course they would forge documents claiming victory. This is exactly the kind of deception your training taught you to expect and resist. Other Japanese soldiers emerge from hiding when they see the leaflets. They walk out of the jungle with their hands raised, accepting the American promise of safe passage, believing the war has truly ended. You watch them go from your concealed position in the forest, and you feel contempt mixed with pity. They have been deceived. They have abandoned their duty. They have surrendered when surrender was explicitly forbidden. You will not make that mistake. You will continue the mission. You will wait for orders that will surely come, because Major Taniguchi promised, because the Empire does not abandon its soldiers, because the alternative, that you might be wrong, that the war might actually be over, that you are continuing to fight for a nation that has already accepted defeat, is unthinkable. You are not alone at first. 3 other soldiers remain with you, men who also dismiss the surrender announcements as propaganda, who also choose to continue fighting rather than risk the shame of being deceived into capitulation. Akatsu Yuichi, Shimada Shoichi, Kozuka Kinshichi. You form a unit of 4, living in the jungle, raiding Filipino settlements for food and supplies, engaging in sporadic firefights with local police and Filipino citizens who you believe are enemy combatants or collaborators. You are careful, disciplined, moving through the forest like ghosts, leaving minimal traces, surviving on rice you steal and fruit you forage, and the absolute conviction that what you are doing matters, that the war continues, that your resistance serves the emperor, even if you cannot see the larger strategic picture. The years begin to accumulate. 1 year becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, 5 becomes 10. Akatsu surrenders in 1950, walking out of the jungle after 6 years, unable to continue, his faith in the mission finally exhausted. You and the remaining 2 watch him go, and you strengthen your resolve, because his surrender proves nothing except his weakness, proves that the Americans are still trying to deceive you into giving up. The leaflets continue to appear, new ones now, with photographs of modern Japan, with messages from family members pleading for your return, with increasingly desperate attempts to convince you that the war ended years ago, that you are fighting for nothing, that you can come home. But you cannot trust them. You have been trained too well. The photographs could be fabricated. The family messages could be coerced. Every piece of evidence presented to you can be explained as sophisticated propaganda, and your training taught you that sophisticated propaganda is exactly what the enemy would deploy against soldiers trained in resistance. So you continue, you wait, you fight your small war in the jungle, while the world outside transforms in ways you cannot imagine, while Japan rebuilds and prospers and forgets, while the soldiers who surrendered in 1945 return home and marry and have children and build lives in a country that has moved so far beyond the war that your continued resistance becomes first a curiosity, then a legend, then almost a myth. Shimada is killed in 1954 during a firefight with local police, shot while raiding a village for rice. You and Kozuka bury him in the jungle and continue the mission because this is what soldiers do. They continue until relieved. They fight until ordered to stop. They honor their dead by refusing to surrender the cause those dead believed in. And the years continue to pass, each one identical to the last in its routines of survival and vigilance and waiting. The jungle becomes your home in ways that transcend mere familiarity, becomes the entire universe with its own seasons and rhythms and rules that have nothing to do with the world beyond the tree line. You and Kozuka develop routines that govern every hour, when to move, when to hide, when to raid the lowland farms for rice and matches and the occasional newspaper that you study for intelligence value, searching for coded messages from Japanese command that might indicate when retrieval will finally come. You read about elections and economic growth and a Japan that seems unrecognizable from the empire you served. But you interpret these stories as propaganda, as false narratives designed to demoralize you into surrender. The Filipinos on Lubang know you exist. They call you holdouts, stragglers, ghosts from a war that ended before their children were born. They leave food sometimes at the jungle's edge, hoping to coax you out peacefully. They broadcast messages over loudspeakers mounted on trucks driven through the island's few roads, messages in Japanese promising safe passage, promising that Japan and the Philippines are at peace now, that you will not be harmed. You hear these messages from your hiding places, and you analyze them with the paranoia of a man whose survival depends on trusting nothing. The food could be poisoned, the promises could be lies, the entire elaborate performance could be designed to lower your guard, to make you vulnerable to capture. In 1965, 20 years after the war's end, you and Kozuka find a leaflet that includes a photograph of your own family, your parents aged beyond recognition, your siblings now middle-aged, all of them holding signs with your name, pleading for your return. You study the photograph for hours, examining every detail, looking for evidence of forgery. The faces are right, but the aging seems excessive, seems designed to convince you that decades have passed, when surely it has only been a few years. Surely the war cannot have been over for 2 decades while you continued fighting. You decide the photograph is sophisticated propaganda, exactly the kind of psychological operation you were trained to resist. You burn the leaflet and bury the ashes and strengthen your resolve. Kozuka is your last companion, the only other person in the world who understands what this mission means, who shares your conviction that surrender is betrayal, that waiting is duty, that the orders you received in 1944 remain valid until explicitly countermanded by proper authority. You develop a language of glances and gestures that requires no words, moving through the jungle with the coordination of men who have survived together so long that you anticipate each other's thoughts. You are not friends exactly. Friendship is too small a word for what you have become to each other. You are witnesses to each other's existence, proof that the mission continues, that the choice to remain was correct. The raids continue. You take rice, you take supplies, and occasionally you exchange fire with Filipino police or farmers who try to stop you. These engagements are brief, tactical. You are not trying to win a war anymore, though you would never admit this even to yourself. You are simply trying to survive until retrieval comes, maintaining combat readiness for whenever Japanese forces return to Lubang to reclaim their lost soldiers. The Filipinos shoot back with increasing accuracy. They have modernized their weapons, their tactics. Several times you are nearly caught, nearly killed, escaping only through the jungle skills you have honed over decades of constant practice. In October 1972, Kozuka is killed during a raid on a rice paddy, shot by police who have been tracking you for days, who finally got lucky or skilled enough to catch you exposed in open ground. You drag his body into the jungle, bury him beside Shimada, and stand over the grave and face the reality that you are now alone, completely alone, the last soldier, the final believer. You are 50 years old, have spent 27 years in the jungle, have outlived everyone who started this mission with you. The loneliness is not new, but the totality of it is crushing, absolute. There is no one left who shares your conviction, no one left who can confirm that you are not insane, that the choice to continue makes sense. But you do continue. What else is there? Surrender means admitting you were wrong, means accepting that Shimada and Kozuka died for nothing, means dishonoring every year you spent in the jungle waiting for orders that apparently will never come.
so you maintain the mission alone, talking to yourself to remember how speech works, conducting one-man patrols through territory you know better than any map, raiding villages with the efficiency of a man who has perfected every movement through endless repetition.
The world outside continues evolving. Japan hosts the Olympics, becomes an economic superpower, transforms from defeated empire into prosperous democracy. Young Japanese people travel to Lubang as tourists, hiking through jungles where Lieutenant Onoda supposedly still hides, treating you like a legend, a story, a curiosity from their grandparents' generation. They do not really believe you exist. How could you? The war ended 3 decades ago. No one could survive that long in isolation, could maintain conviction that absolute, could resist that much evidence that their mission has ended. But you do exist. You are still here, still waiting, still believing that surrender is betrayal and patience is duty, and any day now, any year now, Major Taniguchi will return and relieve you, and the waiting will have been worthwhile. You are painfully aware that this belief requires ignoring mountains of contrary evidence, requires dismissing every logical argument, requires faith that borders on delusion. But faith is all you have left. Faith and duty and the terror of admitting that you might have wasted 3 decades of your life fighting a war that ended before your 30th birthday. Then, in 1974, something changes. A young Japanese man appears in your jungle. His name is Norio Suzuki, and he is 24 years old, younger than you were when you arrived on Lubang, a college dropout who came to the island on what he calls an adventure, searching for 3 things he considers mythical: a panda, a yeti, and Lieutenant Onoda. He wanders through the jungle with a backpack and a camera and the fearless stupidity of someone who has never had to survive anything worse than boredom, calling your name like he is looking for a lost dog, completely unaware that you are tracking him from concealment, watching his clumsy movements, trying to determine if he is genuine or bait, if his youth and seeming harmlessness are authentic or part of an elaborate trap. You make contact on the 4th day, step out from behind a tree and level your rifle at him. Watch him freeze with an expression that cycles through fear and shock and then, impossibly, delight. He raises his hands, but he is smiling, actually smiling, as though encountering an armed man who has been hiding in the jungle for 3 decades is exciting rather than terrifying. "Lieutenant Onoda," he says, in Japanese that confirms he is really from Japan, really speaking your language without accent or hesitation. "I have been looking for you. My name is Suzuki. I am not here to trick you. I just wanted to meet you." You do not lower the rifle. You interrogate him with questions designed to expose deception, asking about Japan, about current events, about details that only a real Japanese citizen would know. He answers easily, too easily, describing a Japan that sounds like science fiction, buildings that touch the sky, trains that move faster than any vehicle you have ever seen, televisions in color, electronics so advanced that they seem like magic. He tells you the emperor is still alive, but diminished, a symbolic figure with no real power. He tells you Japan lost the war but won the peace, became wealthy through manufacturing and trade rather than conquest. Everything he says sounds like propaganda, except for one detail that stops you cold. He knows you exist. Not just that you exist, but specifics, your name, your unit,
The fact that 3 other soldiers were with you initially, that Kozuka was killed 2 years ago. He has read about you in Japanese newspapers, he says. You are famous. People have been searching for you for years. Your family wants you home. The government wants you home. Everyone believes the war is over except you, and they do not blame you for your conviction. They admire it. They see you as a symbol of loyalty and duty, even if that loyalty is directed toward a cause that no longer exists. You want to believe him, but belief feels dangerous, feels the final betrayal after 30 years of resistance. I will only surrender to my commanding officer, you tell him, the words coming out with the force of religious conviction. Bring me Major Taniguchi. Bring me orders from proper authority. Then I will consider what you are telling me, but not before. Not without proof that cannot be fabricated, cannot be propaganda. Suzuki nods, understanding somehow that this is not negotiable, that you need more than his word, or photographs, or newspapers. You need the ritual of military order, need the formal structure that has governed your entire adult life. I will bring him, Suzuki promises. I will go back to Japan, and I will find Major Taniguchi, and I will bring him here, and he will give you orders to stand down. But you have to promise me you will wait, that you will not disappear, that you will meet us when we return.
You make the promise, though promising feels like weakness, like the first crack in the wall you have built around your conviction. Suzuki leaves the jungle with photographs of you, a gaunt, weathered man in a uniform that has been repaired so many times it is more patches than original fabric, holding a rifle that still functions despite 3 decades of tropical humidity, standing beneath trees that have grown tall in the time you have been waiting. The photographs will be published in newspapers around the world, will transform you from legend into confirmed reality, will put pressure on the Japanese government to do something about the soldier who refuses to stop fighting World War II. The waiting now is different. Before, you were waiting for retrieval that might never come. Now you are waiting for something specific, something promised, and the specificity makes time feel slower, makes days stretch into weeks with agonizing deliberation. You maintain your routines, but they feel hollow now, feel like performance rather than mission. You cannot quite believe anymore with the same absolute conviction, cannot quite dismiss the possibility that Suzuki was telling the truth, that the war really ended 30 years ago, that you have wasted the majority of your life on a mission that was rendered obsolete before you turned 30. March 1974. Suzuki returns as promised, and with him is a man who is older, grayer, but unmistakably Major Taniguchi, your commanding officer, the man who gave you orders in 1944 and promised to return. You emerge from the jungle in full uniform, your rifle cleaned and maintained, your posture military despite the decades, and you salute with a precision that brings tears to Taniguchi's eyes. He returns the salute, and then he speaks the words you have been waiting 30 years to hear. Lieutenant Onoda, I hereby relieve you of your duties. The war is over. You are ordered to cease all combat operations and return to Japan. Your mission is complete. The relief should be overwhelming, but what you feel instead is a strange hollowness, a sense that something essential has been taken from you. The mission was everything. It defined your days, gave structure to your existence, provided meaning when meaning was scarce. Without it, what are you? A 52-year-old man who lost 3 decades to a war that ended before he admitted it was over? A soldier who outlived his cause by 30 years? A believer whose faith was directed toward something that stopped existing in 1945? But you follow orders. You have always followed orders. You hand over your rifle, your ammunition, your sword, artifacts from another era, weapons that belonged to an empire that no longer exists except in history books and your memories. The journey back to Japan feels like traveling between worlds, like stepping through a portal that connects 1945 to 1974 without the intervening decades, without the gradual transition that might have made the shock bearable. The airplane itself is disorienting. You have never flown as a passenger, have only seen aircraft as tools of war or supply, and the idea of sitting in cushioned seats while engines carry you across the Pacific at speeds that would have seemed impossible 30 years ago creates a cognitive dissonance you cannot quite process. Through the window, you watch the ocean pass below, and you think about the soldiers who died fighting across these waters, wonder if they would envy your survival or pity your refusal to accept that the fighting had ended. Tokyo appears beneath the aircraft as a glittering expanse of lights and towers that bears no resemblance to the city you remember, the city that was firebombed into ash and rubble before you left for Lubang. This Tokyo is massive, prosperous, vibrant with an energy that speaks of victory rather than defeat, of a nation that has somehow transformed surrender into success. The airport is chaos, reporters with cameras and microphones, officials in suits, crowds of Japanese citizens who have come to see the soldier who refused to stop fighting, who treat you like a hero rather than a fool, who seem to find something admirable in your stubborn loyalty, even if that loyalty was directed toward a cause that died 30 decades ago. The questions come immediately, relentlessly. How did you survive? What did you eat? Did you know the war was over? Why didn't you surrender? You answer mechanically, describing the jungle routines and the raids and the conviction that surrender was betrayal. But your words feel inadequate to explain what 30 years in isolation actually means, what it does to a mind to maintain absolute conviction in the face of overwhelming contrary evidence. The reporters nod and scribble notes and photograph you from every angle, turning your story into content, into narrative, into something consumable by a public that cannot possibly understand what it cost to remain hidden while the world moved on without you. Your family is there. Your parents, impossibly old, your father bent with age, and your mother weeping as she embraces you, her hands touching your face like she is confirming you are real and not another photograph, another rumor. Your siblings crowd around, middle-aged strangers who were children when you left, who have lived entire lives, married, had children of their own, built careers and homes, and accumulated decades of experience while you were frozen in the jungle, unchanging, waiting. They tell you about family members who died while you were gone, about weddings and births and funerals you missed, about a family history that continued without you, that had to continue because waiting for your return would have meant their lives stopping too. The government offers you a pension, back pay for the 30 years of service they never officially acknowledged, compensation for the fact that you followed orders so literally that you could not accept the war's end without proper military command. The money means nothing to you. What would you buy? What do you need beyond rice and matches and the basic tools of jungle survival? The modern world overwhelms you with its abundance, its complexity, its assumption that more is always better, that progress is measured in possessions and convenience rather than duty and sacrifice. You try to adjust.
You rent an apartment in Tokyo, fill it with furniture that feels strange and unnecessary. Learn to navigate a city where everything has changed. The streets are paved, the buildings are tall, the people move with purpose and speed that suggests they have somewhere important to be. You watch television and see Japan portrayed as an economic power. See young people who look nothing like the disciplined soldiers of your generation, who seem soft and comfortable and utterly disconnected from the values that defined your life. They have not known hunger or war or the weight of believing you might die at any moment. They take peace for granted, the way you took duty for granted, and the gap between their assumptions and yours feels unbridgeable.
You become a celebrity, invited to speak at events, asked to write a memoir, treated as a symbol of loyalty and perseverance, even by people who tacitly acknowledge that your loyalty was misplaced and your perseverance was wasted on a mission that ended before you admitted it. You write the book because writing helps you process what happened, helps you transform chaos into narrative, helps you find some meaning in the 30 years beyond simple survival. The book becomes a bestseller in Japan, resonates with something in the national psyche, perhaps the guilt of forgetting soldiers like you, perhaps admiration for conviction that absolute, even if misdirected, perhaps simply fascination with someone who's lived outside normal time, who experienced the war as an eternal present rather than a historical event. But success does not bring peace. You cannot shake the feeling that you wasted your life, that Shimada and Kozuka died for nothing, that the mission you believed in so completely was rendered meaningless the moment the emperor spoke the words of surrender in August 1945. Everything you did after that moment, the hiding, the fighting, the vigilance, the decades of waiting, was based on a refusal to accept reality, a conviction so strong it overrode evidence, logic, the testimony of everyone you encountered. Were you loyal, or were you delusional? Were you following orders, or were you trapped in a fantasy you could not abandon without admitting that everything you suffered was unnecessary? The questions haunt you. Japan moves on quickly from its fascination with your story, finds new celebrities, new narratives, new ways to process its complicated relationship with the war and defeat and rebirth. You become yesterday's news, and the anonymity is almost a relief, except that it leaves you alone with your thoughts, with the growing understanding that you cannot go back to who you were before Lubang, but you also cannot fully become whoever you are supposed to be now. You leave Japan. The decision comes suddenly, but feels inevitable. This country is not yours anymore, belongs to people who understand it in ways you never will, who were shaped by the post-war experience of rebuilding, while you were shaped by the wartime experience of absolute obedience. You moved to Brazil in 1975, choosing a place as far from Japan and Lubang as geography allows, seeking distance from the memories and the questions and the weight of being Hiro Onoda, the soldier who fought for 30 years after the war ended. You buy a ranch in Mato Grosso do Sul, cattle land that stretches toward horizons unmarked by the jungle canopy that defined 3 decades of your existence. The work is hard, physical, demanding in ways that occupy your body and quiet your mind. You wake before dawn, tend animals, mend fences, perform the endless maintenance that ranching requires. The labor feels clean somehow, uncomplicated by ideology or duty or the impossible question of whether your life meant something or was wasted on a mission that became obsolete before you could admit it. The other ranchers accept you without much curiosity. You are Japanese, yes, and your story occasionally surfaces in conversation, but mostly you are just another immigrant trying to build something in soil that does not carry the weight of your personal history. The cattle do not care that you spent 30 years in the jungle. The land does not judge whether your loyalty was admirable or pathological. The sunrise looks the same here as it did on Lubang, and that sameness is both comforting and heartbreaking, proof that the world continued turning with complete indifference to whether you were fighting or hiding or waiting for orders that should have come decades earlier than they did. You marry a Japanese woman living in Brazil, build a quiet life that has nothing to do with war or duty, or the photographs that still occasionally appear in magazines when journalists need to fill space with stories about Japan's complicated past. Your wife knows who you were, but cares more about who you are now, a rancher, a husband, a man trying to find peace in the routine of ordinary days. You do not talk much about Lubang. What would you say? That you were loyal? That you were foolish? That you still do not know which description is accurate? Still cannot reconcile the pride you feel in your conviction with the grief you feel about the wasted years? The decades pass with the strange acceleration of later life, each year feeling shorter than the last, time compressing in inverse proportion to how slowly it moved in the jungle, where every day was identical and eternal. You watch Japan from a distance, see it continue its economic miracle, see the generation that knew the war die off and be replaced by generations for whom World War II is just history, just something studied in textbooks rather than lived through with all its terror and deprivation and propaganda. You wonder if anyone remembers Shimada and Kozuka, if their deaths are commemorated anywhere, if their families found peace with the knowledge that their sons died in 1954 and 1972, fighting a war that ended in 1945.
You die in 2014 at 91 years old, having outlived almost everyone who knew you during the war, having survived long enough to see your story become history rather than current events. The obituaries call you the last Japanese holdout, the soldier who refused to surrender, the symbol of loyalty taken to its logical extreme. They are kind mostly, focusing on your conviction rather than your delusion, treating your 30 years in the jungle as admirable rather than tragic. But you know the truth is more complicated than the obituaries can capture, that your story is about what happens when duty becomes disconnected from context, when loyalty persists beyond the point where the cause it serves has any meaning. In the end, what remains is this: you followed orders, you waited as instructed, you maintained your mission with absolute conviction, even when that conviction required ignoring reality, required believing that everyone else was deceived and only you saw truth. You were right about your duty and wrong about everything else. You survived when others did not, but survival alone is not victory, is not vindication. is just the continuation of breath and heartbeat while the world transforms around you in ways you cannot control or understand. The mission you believed in so completely ended in 1945, but you could not end with it, could not accept that the purpose defining your existence had been rendered obsolete by forces beyond your control. So you continued, 30 years in the jungle, then 40 years trying to build a life in the aftermath, trying to find meaning in the continuation, trying to answer the question that haunted you from the moment you handed over your rifle to Major Taniguchi. If the war ended in 1945, what were those 30 years for? Perhaps there is no answer. Perhaps some lives resist simple narrative, resist the clean categories of heroism or foolishness, exist in the complicated space where conviction and delusion overlap so completely that separating them becomes impossible. You were the soldier who would not surrender. You were the man who wasted 3 decades on a mission that ended before he could admit it. You were both. You were neither. You were simply Hiro Onoda, doing what you believed was right with the information you had and the training you received and the faith that orders meant something, that duty mattered, that waiting would eventually be rewarded. The jungle remembers nothing. The ranch continues without you. The story endures, told and retold, simplified and mythologized, transformed into whatever lesson the teller needs it to teach. And somewhere in that endless retelling, the truth remains, that one man chose loyalty over logic, duty over evidence, conviction over surrender, and paid for that choice with the majority of his life. Whether that payment was worthwhile, whether the sacrifice had meaning, whether the waiting was vindicated or wasted, these are questions that died with you, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, leaving only the fact of 30 years and the echo of a soldier who could not stop fighting even when the war had moved on without him.